Hey guys, shalom, and welcome to Wisdom and Torah Ministries. I'm sitting here and I was just doing some research and studying a very interesting topic, by the way. I want to show you the book real quick of what I'm researching lately. It's called New Creation in Paul's Letters and Thought. Very good book. I think this book is out of print, and if you can find it, it's a lot of money. It's about $100, but I was able to get the PDF on the internet for free, so it was great. So, great book. It's talking about new creation. The new Exodus in the book of Isaiah, and also the apostolic writings, and a great resource to have to understand this very important principle. And okay, so I was sitting here waiting and thinking, hey, I want to talk about the temple and the Bible, being that it's the 24th of December and so many people are not necessarily, celebrating the pre-day of Christmas, in which I don't celebrate, so don't send me any Christmas wishes, please. Just don't. Okay. Anyway, but I said, hey, why don't you guys ask me questions and I'll try to answer them. So let's try that. Okay, so the first question I got here is about, okay, let me see. I got different people sharing stuff. Okay, so what day of the week was the temple destroyed? Actually, I don't know. I don't know. It was the 9th of Av a whole bunch of years ago. So I don't know exactly what day of the week that was at that time when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. It will be kind of cool to find out, though, because it says what psalms were being sung, even though it was not a correct one for that day. Or I know that each day of the week had a particular psalm that they used to sing. Like on first day of the week, on a Sunday, will be Psalm 24. The Sabbath is 92. And so on and so forth. So that would be a really cool thing to consider if you do like devotions and you read about the temple and you understand that each psalm is teaching you how to ascend. So let me show you in the app of the temple how will that work and where will that work, so you get an idea of the topography of the temple when you study this stuff out. So the question is, which psalms were sung in the temple? There are different ones. There were 7, clearly. That's not including the Hallel Psalms and the Shir HaMa'alot, which is the Psalms of Ascent. So there, I'm going to show you where they used to sing the Psalms of Ascent in the temple, and then I'm going to show you where the Levites used to sing the daily Psalms for the week during the Tamid and the Mincha. The Tamid is the morning offering, and the service, for the Shaharit, the morning service. And the Mincha is the afternoon, when they put a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the afternoon, okay? So let me take you there real quick so you see what I mean. Here you have this is the app of the temple that we use. Wisdom and Torah is actually the research of my teacher, Joseph Good. And this is the topography of Jerusalem. And I'm going to come back to this a little later when I'm talking about Deuteronomy chapter 16. And I'm going to talk about the city walls and the importance of Passover in Jerusalem at that time. So let me go here real quick. I'm going to take you to the court of the women. Yeah, right here on the altar. And I'm going to turn around and go right outside. And I'm going to go to the Nicanor gate right outside. I'm going to go down to the court of the women. I'm going to turn around. And I'm going to be looking up towards the Nicanor gate. And here you have the 15 steps of the for the Psalms of Ascent. For the Psalms of Ascent. Now, when they used to sing the daily sacrifices or the daily Psalms of the week, the Levites sang them right where these steps are. Let me move up north a little bit, and you see those steps right in front of me, right here. That is called the Dukan. The Dukan is the location where the Levites used to sing the Psalms of the week, all the regular Hallel Psalms of and go on and so forth. It's a worship. It's a way of worship and things like that. So I think that it's kind of important to understand these principles because it gives us an idea of what the temple function was. So when people do praise and worship in the Bible is different than what worship represents today. Worship in Scripture is your everyday life. Is how you live your life according to the commitment of the covenant. so that you're able to live according to the biblical principles of the covenant. Praise is what you did in the temple. Worship is bringing offering, okay, based on how you're going to honor God based on his commandments in your daily life. And praise is how we, the Levites got everyone to praise God and honor his name. It's interesting because in the Psalms, when you see the word Selah, my teacher Joseph Good and I, we were looking into this, and the Psalms say that we are to ascribe greatness to God's name. Okay, so this is why you have the reciprocal response when they say the Shema. The last part of the Shema will be, blessed be his name and his kingdom forever and ever. That also became the way of worship in the temple every time you hear the Psalms. And in the Psalms, you have what is called Selah. Now, Selah becomes a musical interlude, or it's a pause. So the question is, why do they have the pause? Is to ascribe greatness to God's name. And everyone will prostrate and say, blessed be his name and his kingdom forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. So it's kind of cool because in the congregation that I was going to, the one that I visited sometimes, when we're reading, the Psalms and we say Selah, everyone responds. So we try to keep that same custom from the temple into the Shabbat service. When we read a Psalm and it says Selah, then everyone would ascribe greatness to God's name. Can you imagine when you look at, let's say, 200,000 or 300,000 people in the temple doing the worship on the morning and the afternoon service, and they're hearing the Psalms, and then all of a sudden they hear the word Selah, and then everyone will bow down and worship with one voice, saying the same thing. Anywhere they can hear the service and they hear the word will bow down. Talk about reverence in worship. Okay, it says, another person asked me, do you see Ezekiel's temple described as a potential temple that Israel lost the opportunity to have, or a temple that's still to come? Great question. I do believe that, and many people don't know this, by the way, when you read Dan Bahan and you read some of the other archaeologists, we know that the second temple expansion by Herod, they added the sizes of the buildings found in Ezekiel. Okay? So when you look at the second temple period, the size of the buildings, let me show you what I mean. So let me take you out again to the temple. And I'm going to give you this map again. Now you see these buildings on the side, the treasury, and you see the buildings right here in front of you. Well, they have like the canopy. It says House of the Treasuries, that building. Then you have the House of Chamber of Hewn Stone, that building. Then you have the House of the Spark. All those buildings are the exact size that Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel. Now, it's interesting because during the second temple period expansion, they followed as much as they could in the book of Ezekiel, but there were some things that they could not understand at that time. So the men of the Great Sanhedrin Council, or the men of the Great Assembly, understood that the book of Ezekiel was a prophetic picture for the Messianic age. Okay, for the coming of Messiah to have a temple. That's a whole teaching in itself, why a temple will be built. Sadly, many people are not really aware of temple function, so they don't really recognize the importance of the temple. Not only to bring offerings, but also as a place of a hub of authority and basically the throne of God. If you go to Ezekiel chapters 43, it really gives you a glimpse. I'm reading from this resource that I highly recommend you get it. Okay, it's a really good resource. As you see behind me right here, I have all of these are cultural background commentaries, and also on the top. And all this is my Ancient Near Eastern section, as well as this one and that one behind. But this book right here is called the Archaeology Bible by Crossway. I highly recommend you get this one because it has Ancient Near Eastern history, and also it has a lot of information for archaeology. It's not opinions. They're not trying to give you the bias of the religious person, but basically the information, just the information, exactly how they find it. Okay. Now let me read you this. I want to show you here too, because this is important for context. When you read In Ezekiel chapters 43, verse 1 through 6, it says this. It says, then he led me to the gate facing east. And behold, the glory of the Lord of Israel, of the God of Israel, was coming from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters. And the earth shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I have seen when he came to destroy the city. Just like the vision that I have seen by the Chebar channel. And I fell on my face. And as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing east, the Spirit led me up and brought me into the inner court. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Now, remember, many people say that that's the temple of the Antichrist. Well, how can that be the temple of the Antichrist if the glory of God is going to be able to be there? Think about it. The presence of God cannot dwell in a defiled temple. Remember that, okay? So whoever tells you that that's the temple of the Antichrist, they're not studying the temple. They have no idea about Kedusha, holiness, and sacred spaces. They're just repeating what somebody else says. And that's a fact, okay? Now, in verse 6, it says this. While the man was standing beside me, I heard one speaking to me out of the temple. And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. And the house of Israel shall no more defile my holy name. Now, the reason why I want to show you this is because the expression, the soles of my feet, was very much understood in the ancient Near East as a location for authority of a king. So what the ancients did, they actually put footprints, right over here. They put footprints of their gods. I'm going to show you right here. This is one of the temples of the pagans, right? Let me tell you from where it's from. This is footprints of a known god at the Hittite site of Ein Dara in North Syria, okay? So they have a temple. What they do, to show that their god dwells there, they will put footprints of their gods by the thresholds of their temple. You see that? To show authority. So the Lord is using a language that the ancient world would have understood. Why? Because like when the Lord tells Abraham, I want you to walk to and fro, go to the north, to the south, to the east, to the north, and you walk to and fro in the ancient world, walking on property represented authority. That's why in the temple, if you go here to the temple, right? Nowhere in that temple can you wear shoes. You gotta be barefooted. Why? Because it's sacred space. Only the Lord has sole authority over the whole mountain. It's God's house. Okay? So no one can put shoes, wear shoes on the mountain, on Har Habayit, which is on the Temple Mount. And this is just one example. So understanding the temple is important to know really what the essence of holiness really is. Now, while you see the map there, I want to show you the topography, right? Let me show you this. Check this out. This is from the Mount of Olives. Now, when we did the app, we took in consideration the topography of what Jerusalem looked like back in the day. Now, for those who believe that the Gihon Springs was actually the source of the water, the source of the water, remember that it's 544 meters below above sea level to where the temple building is right here. The Gihon Springs was outside the city walls, 644 meters above sea level, 100 meters below the top of the mountain. So clearly, the water was not the source of the temple. Also, there is, as you look at the map, you go from there. I'm going to read in Deuteronomy chapter 16. In Deuteronomy chapter 16, come back to me again, so I'll get sure here. In Deuteronomy chapter 16, I'm going to show you why it is important to understand the feast in connection with the temple. If you read Numbers 28 and 29, which I'm going to do research. I've been doing research with my teacher for the last, I went to his house in Houston. We spent the whole week all day long, looking into each one of the feasts, thinking about each sacrifice, how they did it, the service in the morning, the musaf, all the sacrifices they brought through, and how they did it, how they offer them, what was their meaning. Look into every aspect of the temple service. In Deuteronomy 16, we're going to focus here for a little bit. So I want to share some things with you. As when we go back to the map, I want you to notice the city walls, okay? And I'm going to show you how the Bible tells us that when the temple was standing, no one could eat the lamb outside city walls. The reason is because the walls and the city were holy. Now, how can we prove this, you may ask? Well, there are 10 degrees of holiness, okay? In the Mishnah, Kelim talks about the degrees of holiness. You go from outside Jerusalem, and Jerusalem inside the city walls is holier than the rest of the world. And then the Temple Mount is holier than the rest of Jerusalem in the first century Jerusalem. Then the court of the women is holier than the rest, and the court of Israel, and so on and so forth, until you get to the Holy of Holies, okay? So, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16 says, observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover of the Lord your God. For in the month of Aviv, the Lord, by the way, right now there's controversy between Aviv and Nisan. So should you say Aviv or Nisan? Well, Aviv is a Canaanite word that means, or Hebrew that means spring. Nisan is actually, is also, it goes from the Akkadian also to the Babylonian. It means spring, okay? It's the same thing, springtime. Both of them mean the same thing. It says, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd, and the place where the Lord, see, it says, at the place that the Lord will choose, and make his name dwell there. You shall not eat you shall eat no leaven bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it, and unleavened bread. Okay, so it says nowhere but the place where he chooses. Okay, so people ask me all the time, wait a minute, Rico. When you read in the Torah and in the prophets and in the Kings and the Chronicles, it tells us that there were times that they were allowed to bring offerings in an altar other than the temple. Well, let's look at that. You have the tabernacle in the wilderness. That was the only place you can bring the offerings. Then they went into the land of Israel. They went to Gilgal, and then they went to Shechem. They went to Shiloh. Now Shiloh was the tabernacle was there permanently for over 3 centuries. Okay, then it was destroyed. Then at the time King Saul became the king of Israel, then the tabernacle was moved to Nav, and there, from when David became king, it was moved to Givon. That's Givon. That's about 2 miles north of Jerusalem. And then during the time of Solomon, then the Temple Mount, as we see here. The Temple Mount and Shiloh were the only 2 places that you can bring an offering to. When those things were standing, when the temple in Jerusalem was standing, and the Shiloh was standing in the tabernacle in Shiloh, those 2 places were the only places that you can bring the offerings. Now, when the tabernacle in Shiloh was destroyed, then they were allowed to bring certain offerings. Never from Yom HaKippurim, right? But like free will stuff, they were allowed to build an altar for the Lord. But when the temple was established in Jerusalem, that was eliminated, and no other place you can bring an offering except for the place where he chose. In this case, from Shiloh and then to Jerusalem. So if you bring an offering any place else other than Jerusalem, you are committing encroachment. You're encroaching on the holy. Okay? So I say this because there are certain people that they are now trying to slaughter a lamb and slaughter it in the United States and put the blood on the doorpost. That is ridiculous. Nowhere after the Exodus experience, nowhere does the Bible say you're commanded to do that. Okay? The Samaritans do it. You know, they have the Passover the way they did it in Nisan. Why? Because they don't recognize Jerusalem as the seat of authority of God. Okay? So anyone within our ranks who are doing this because they want to do it like Exodus, it makes no sense because they did it like in the Exodus, but then never again they've been able to do it because God gave a commandment not to do it any other place but where he put his name, which is Jerusalem. Okay? All right. So hopefully that was a little bit more clear, and you can go from there and look it up. Keep searching this up. But please, do me a favor. If you're not really looking into temple protocol, it's difficult to have a conversation with people who are not really willing to look into the temple protocol and talk from that perspective. And then you're not doing anybody a favor, because then we are having debates and arguments and not looking at the facts, not looking at the evidence. Now, how do they do it then? Let me take you to the map as I'm explaining this. So what happens if Israel goes into the dispersion? For what I understand, and I can't remember exactly how many miles radius around Jerusalem, but according to the Great Assembly, because of the dispersion, when the Israelites got scattered among the nations, and they cannot come up to Jerusalem for whatever reason, war, whatever. But if you lived in the land of Israel and you were, I think it's like 15 kilometers, I can't remember if it's 15 kilometers or 15 mile radius around Jerusalem, anyone who lived within that radius, they needed to come up to Jerusalem. Okay? But please don't quote me on that. I'm still trying to figure out exactly the mileage. But I do know that was that. So how did they do the Passover Seder when they were not in Jerusalem? Well, you do the Seder. The Seder was established by the men of the Great Assembly, following all of the steps of the 15 steps, 15 steps of the Haggadah, the Seder, right? They could do the Seder, but they would not eat a lamb, because that's in the time of the temple period, okay? So you will not eat a lamb, so that they will not say that the lamb was offered outside of the city of Jerusalem, because the city of Jerusalem is called holy. Kedusha is kadosh, separated for the Lord, and this is most holy over there for God in that day to do to have the Passover lamb. There were like ovens all over Jerusalem. They will prepare the highways. They will get everything ready within the city walls, as you see here, so that they will have access to roast it, so that they will be ready for that evening. It's quite interesting. Now, when you read the book of Nehemiah, you're going to notice that when he comes back from Persia, when he returns to Israel from Persia, that he is really adamant about restoring the walls of Jerusalem. But the question is, who are the people rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem? The priests. The priests. And I'm going to see, let me get my book here real quick. As I'm talking to you, because every time there was an expansion of the city, of Jerusalem, and the book that I'm using now is called Colorful Ceremonies of the Beit HaMikdash, based on the Rambam, and they have a section here of what to do when you dedicate the walls. It's quite interesting because there's a dedication of the Kedusha, so it's called the surrounding Kedusha. What to do when they would dedicate the walls. We know that there was a third wall. There was the first wall, second wall, and the third wall. The third wall, if you go to the map right here, and I'm going to look to the right side of your screen. Follow my little thing here. You see the Bethesda? This pool right here was outside the city of Jerusalem during the time of Messiah. After Yeshua died and resurrected, this area was enclosed by the third wall right here on the north. Okay, so all this area was enclosed later on by the third wall. Okay, so whatever you read about the pool of Bethesda in the first century, that was not part of the city walls, inside the city walls in the first century. Okay, so just remember that. It's part of a little history that I think is important to understand. So when you read about the city walls, so let's say that you're going to do an expansion of the wall because of what is called population explosion. Okay, you need to have, more space for people. But it was not so easy just to do a construction of the wall and that's it. Well, we got a new wall. Come on in, guys, move in. No, the city is kadosh, it's holy. So you have to dedicate the wall in the proper kedusha. Okay, how do they do it? In chapters 19, in page 205 of this particular book, It says, it says both the temple and the city of Jerusalem were very holy, of course, but their kedusha or the holiness were not exactly the same. Whereas kedashim kalim, the korbanot, were less holiness. Let me move on. There's a lot of terms here that I don't want to tell you about. It says, whenever the temple or Jerusalem was enlarged, the area of their holiness have to be extended likewise. The full Sanhedrin of 71 members made this decision to enlarge the holiness only after consulting with a king or a prophet, or if they had the Urim and the Thummim at the time of the first and second temple period. Actually, at the time of the first temple, because the second temple period they didn't have it. This was effected through an unusual ceremony. So it's not like you can just get up one day and say, okay guys, let's go do a expansion of the wall. We need more space, so let's just go do this. No, they have to go through what is called the equivalent of the government or the Supreme Court, which was the Sanhedrin, made up of 71 men, okay? So it says, to extend Jerusalem's holiness, they first sacrificed two korbanot todah, two thanksgiving offerings. As usual, these were accompanied by lachamei todah, for the 40 loaves, which each thanksgiving, 10 rekiking, or the 10 chalot, or 10 loaves, both baked directly on the oven floor, described in chapter 11 and 19 in this book. Okay? And now, let me move on here. It says, a procession for this unusual ceremony, two loaves of chametz, okay, of leavened bread were taken, one for each thanksgiving, and now the kedusha procession, the holiness procession, could begin. In front of the procession was the two priests, the high priest and the sagan, okay, this, like the vice president. It says the two kohanim, one following the other, and each carrying a loaf of the bread. Behind them walked the Sanhedrin, and following them in turn were huge crowds of all of Israel who came to witness the event. The kedusha, or the holiness procession, were also accompanied by musical instruments such as flutes, harps, and cymbals. This is important because when the temple is dedicated again, they're going to have to sanctify the whole city. Okay, they have to build the walls again. You just can't build the Temple Mount without building the whole wall again. They have to do huge construction around Jerusalem to to surround this the old city to be kedusha, to have the proper kedusha, holiness. Okay, it says, as they left the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, the column turned right to follow the outer wall of Jerusalem. At every corner and at each large stone, the long column halted while they sang Mizmor Shir Hanukkah Habayit. You heard the words? Mizmor, the psalm, the song of dedication of the house. Okay? So which is Psalms 30. So let's look at Psalms 30 and see what it says. Because then you get an idea how they used to dedicate the walls of the temple. So let's just say, let's put this into our practice. Let's go to our model. Let's just say that I want to go to the temple. Okay, so let me jump out. I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to jump out all the way down. Whoa, 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 whoa. I'm going all the way down. I should be able to go down here pretty. We're going to get on that wall. In our app, we're able to go up the wall, okay? So I'm going to walk through here, look for the stairs. Okay? We're going to be walking the wall. In our app, you're able to go through the process of going up the stairs. If I can find how to get up there again. Okay. All right, so I think it's through here. Look for the stairs. So as I look for the stairs, hopefully I can find them now. It's been a while. We did an update, so Trying to find out I got it. So as we're looking for the stairs, right? If you're walking up, they're dedicating this. Remember the time of Daniel. Of Nehemiah. In the time of Nehemiah, when you look at this wall and they're expanding, there it is. There it is. If I look back, I'll be able to get up there. Okay. So you're able to get back up. Now remember, let's pretend that we're talking about the time of... it's not letting me go up there. Not letting me go up there this time around. I don't know why. All right. So, yeah, there it is. I can get up there. Okay. So now I'm in the city. You see this? You walk up a little bit more. And then you can look towards the temple. During the time of Nehemiah, they were able to dedicate the wall. So after dedicating the wall, it was supposed to go to the right, but right now, for the sake of the demonstration, we're going to go going south towards the city of David. Okay. So as we're walking down, and we get to a particular location, remember the temple in the city was a fort, trying to keep everything protected. Okay. So let's just pretend they get to this corner here. Right? And they start singing Psalms 30. And then it's dedication of the house. A psalm of David, a psalm of the dedication of the temple. The word there for dedication is Chanukah. It says, I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up and have not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord, my Elohim, and I cry to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you have brought up my soul from the Sheol. You restore me to life from among those who go down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you, his saints, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is for a moment, and his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may tarry for a night, but joy comes in the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you make my mountain stand strong. You hid your face. I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cry, and to the Lord I plead for mercy. What profit is there in my death? If I go down to the pit, will the dust praise you? Will it tell all of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, to be merciful to me, O Lord, be my helper. You have turned for me my mourning into dancing. You have loosed my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness. In my glory may sing your praises and not be silent. O Lord, my Elohim, I will give thanks to you forever. They would actually sing that, and then they go, okay, just keep moving down. Let's go up this time. We're going to go walking up down the wall, dedicating the wall. So everything was done to preserve the holiness of the city, because the whole city was holy. This is one of the things we can do in our app to help you actually explore and to be able to see what it looked like, more or less, because everything is according to measurements anyway. So you're walking north right now on the eastern wall of the temple. Each section was dedicated by Nehemiah during the time of the return from Babylon. Later on, it was expanded on the north, and it was expanded on the west. Okay, so here we have this outer wall that leads us to, this is interesting because many people don't realize that in the temple there was holiness that you needed to deal with. Holiness you needed to deal with, and the walls needed to be dedicated. You see this? To the right is the Mount of Olives. To the left is the big wall of the temple. And this is the protective wall. Okay, it'll come back again. Okay, this is one of the features that we have in our app that will help you in your journey to understand what it looked like and how it was. And this is not, this particular model does not contain the third wall. It only has up to the time of the Messiah, okay? The third wall was actually finished by the year 49. By the year 49 of the Common Era. So hopefully you'll enjoy that, a little bit of a different type of, experience as you learn about the temple and even the dedication of the walls. Many people don't know that you cannot just expand the city without the proper kedusha, holiness, and the whole thing. It says when the procession was eventually reached the new area of Jerusalem that was about to be added, they stopped for the last time and turned their attention to those two loaves of bread. On the instruction of the prophet, they burned one of the bread which had been held by the first priest right in front of the procession, while the second bread was eaten there in the new area. So one was burned, the other one was eaten. This showed that this district now also had the proper holiness of Jerusalem, where the kedushim kalim may be eaten, where the, for example, the sacrifices or the offerings of lesser holiness could be eaten. Okay. You don't have to eat it inside the temple, but you have to eat it inside the walls of Jerusalem because the city is holy. It says, when the temple itself was being enlarged, a very similar ceremony took place. However, instead of using korban todah with lesser kedusha of kedushim kalim, they prepare the korban mincha, the flour offering. This had yet more holiness, and that could be only in the temple. So you see the difference of holiness. It depends where you are in the temple. Hopefully this is making sense. I had another question that I want to address. And a brother asked this question. And in Acts 15, it mentions new believers abstaining from four things: idolatry, blood, sexual immorality, and eating a strangled animal. The first three are fairly straightforward ideas with multiple levels of depth. Could you speak about the fourth one, which will be strangled animals? Okay. It says, I understand that these ideas come from Leviticus, were the basic things that a stranger in Israel needed to do. I haven't heard anyone elaborate on the deeper meaning of the strangling. Well, it all deals with, shedding of the blood. We are allowed, according to the Torah, that if you cannot go to Jerusalem and you're hungry, that you can slaughter an animal as long as you cut the throat and you spill the blood and then cover it. Okay? So it's the proper way of slaughtering an animal. There's a lot of science behind it. There's a book that I have that I don't know if I can see it right now, but I would love to share it with you if I could find it. But unfortunately, it wasn't part of the teaching, so I don't know where it is right now. Okay? But it was a Jewish man who put the research together, and they found that the way that every kosher animal is created is different than the non-kosher animals. The clean animals versus the unclean animals. For example, the pork, the pig. The pig has got two main veins going towards the head. They're not connected. Now, the horse, the same way. But the cow and the sheep and the goats and everything that was put on the altar, they have what is called something mirabilis. It's the way that the whole vein and on the veins and the blood circulate was connected all together. So when you cut here, immediately would stop the blood from going to the brain. Okay, so thus it creates unconsciousness right away. The animal does not suffer. In regards to the pig, if you cut the throat of the pig, he's still squealing and he's just fighting because he still has another source of blood going to the brain, and then he dies when he's no longer has blood in his body. So even the way that the animals that are chosen by God to be used on the altar, the way that He created them, they are designed to completely just lose the consciousness, and it's more of a mercy for the animal, and also medically for him not to release certain toxins. It's like so. Therefore, it'd be healthier for us. In the first century, something of interest that I hope that you study is that Caesar Augustus gave certain rights to Jewish people living in the empire, the Roman Empire at the time. I think one of the kings of Israel was being loyal to him when there was a war between them and Egypt, and he rewarded them with a lot of privileges. For example, one of the privileges that the Jewish people in Asia Minor as well as in Roman Greece received was they all had in the agora, which is the market, they had access to kosher meat. Also, the Jewish men were not allowed, at least the Torah following ones, were not allowed to serve in the Roman army. Why? Because they needed to keep the feast and they needed to keep the Sabbath, and they follow the strict rules of kosher. So therefore, they were not allowed to fight because they didn't have the means for them to have kosher meat in the middle of war. So they were exempt from that. Also, they were allowed to send the half shekel from whatever they were in the kingdom to Jerusalem every year like they were supposed to. And also they were allowed to have their synagogues in every place they wanted to, in every Jewish community, and only there can you worship. Only there can you celebrate the Sabbath, the feast, and you even, whatever. They could not do it any other place. They could only do it at a place that was accepted by the Roman Empire to do it, in this case, a synagogue. That's why Paul, every time he traveled somewhere, he took, everywhere he went, he always went to a synagogue. Okay? So, it is important that we as believers will know a lot of these principles. Because when we don't study the temple, in my opinion, we're not really going to understand fully the Bible. Let me tell you why. 279 commandments. 279 of the 613 are directly linked with the temple. And another 145 commandments in the Torah are indirectly linked with the temple. So if you eliminate the temple studies, then you are going to really, really have a tough time understanding many things. And by the way, many things that are causing problems and a lot of arguments and many, debates within the Hebrew roots of Messianic, whatever you want to call people, are normally, not all the time, but 90% of them deals directly with temple holiness, temple purity, with how things were done. Sadly, we never focused on that because we were taught that the temples no longer needed. If that's the case, then let the evidence stand. It seems like in this country, evidence of anything stands for much anymore. And what's interesting is that Christianity has the same type of attitude. And sadly, many people within the Hebrew roots, which are still holding on to many things that were learned in the system of Christianity, and we're trying to reconcile the Torah and how it applies to us, and then the temple and how it applied to us. And then we try to eliminate things that we do not understand, instead of trying to really research and look into it. So when you go into Acts 21, verse 17. Actually, what I'm going to do, I want to put it in the Bible here so we can follow it together. Is that okay? So let me go to Acts 21. Acts 21 verse 17, and we'll read it together. Acts 21. I'm in the wrong book. Acts 21. There we go. All right, guys. Read it with me, okay? We're going to start in verse 17. Listen to this. It says, when we came to Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us gladly. Now, I want to remind you that in Acts 18 and Acts 19 or Acts 20, it tells us that Paul was hastening to get to Jerusalem for Pentecost. Now, did you know that Pentecost was actually a 7-day celebration, not a 1-day celebration like it's taught today? Did you know that? That's another teaching that we'll do sometime. Okay, don't write me questions about it right now. It's another teaching that we'll present. All Sukkot, Passover, and this unleavened bread, and also Pentecost was a 7-day celebration. Okay? Something that we're going to have to fix eventually. But if you go to Acts chapters 18, right? Watch this. 18 verse 18 says, so Paul still remained a good while then. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him. And he had his hair cut off at Cenchrea, which outside of Corinth, for he had taken a vow. Now this is a Nazarite vow. Now watch. In Acts chapters 20, verse 16, it says, "For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus, so that he would not have spent time in Asia, for he was hurrying to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost." It's interesting. If the law was done away with and the feasts are no longer to be observed, then why is Paul going to Jerusalem for the day of Pentecost or the week of Pentecost? He clearly says he needed to be there. And he took a Nazarite vow, which includes 3 sacrifices and also a basket of unleavened bread to take into the temple. Now, he's doing this 28 years after Yeshua died and resurrected. That's a question you must ask. So now he goes and meet up the leadership, the Nazarene Council, the leaders of the gospel in Jerusalem, okay? And now when you read, says, "And when we came to Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us gladly. On the next day, Paul went with us to James, and to all the elders were present. After greeting them, he began to relate one after the other the things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard this, they began to glorify God. And they said to Paul," listen to what they say to Paul, "You see, brother, how many 10,000s they are among the Jews who have believed, and they are all zealous adherents of the Torah." They are all keeping the Torah 28 years after Yeshua died and resurrected. And they have been informed about you that you are teaching all the Jews. It's a false testimony against Paul. That you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles the abandonment of Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or to live according to our customs. What then is to be done? Doubtless they will all hear that you have come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow upon themselves. Now take these men and purify yourself alone with them. Pay their expenses. Purify means a mikveh. Pay their expenses so they can shave their heads. See? Shave their heads. And everyone will know which they have been informed about you. But you... okay, let me read that again. And everyone will know that the things which they have been informed about you are nothing. But you yourself also agree with observing the law. But then verse 25 is what everyone gets all bent out of shape. And it says, "But concerning the Gentiles who have believed, we have written a letter after deciding they should avoid food sacrificed to idols, blood and what have been strangled, and sexual immorality." Now, you notice that is basically saying they're not going to do a Nazarite vow. Have you ever wondered why? A Gentile who is not circumcised cannot do a Nazarite vow. Because the fact that the Nazarite vow included sacrifices meant this. Let me show you what I mean. And I'm going to come back to the chapter. But understanding the temple, let me take you back to the temple here. I'm going to take you back to the royal stoa, and then we are going to walk inside that wall right there, and I'm going to take you to the soreg. So all the Gentiles can be here. They can go through the 500 by 500. You see this wall right here? This is a wall inside the temple. This is a wall all around the buildings inside on the Temple Mount. It's called the 500 by 500. You see that in chapters 42 of the book of Ezekiel. Now, once I'm here, the Gentiles can still be here. All the Gentiles from the nations. Where you see the arches in front of me are what is called Solomon's porch. The portico, Solomon's portico. Now, here's the soreg. You see the soreg? A Gentile cannot go beyond this point. So therefore, a Gentile cannot do a Nazarite vow. And even if he accepted Yeshua and he goes to Jerusalem, he will not be able to cross that threshold because he is not circumcised. Now, Rico, where do you get this stuff from? Ezekiel, chapters 43. In Ezekiel chapters 43. Chapters 44, I'm sorry guys, chapters 44 clearly tells us, verse 6, thus, now say to the rebellious, the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, O house of Israel, let us have no more of your abominations. When you brought in foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary to defile it. So therefore, according to the Torah and the prophets, and in this case Ezekiel, if you cross that threshold there, then you will be, and you're not circumcised in the flesh, you will be defiling it. Only covenantal people can go through there. So the question is, Rico, where do you find anywhere in the Bible where it talks about that perimeter being enclosed around the temple? Okay, you go to Exodus, chapters 19. In Exodus chapters 19, verse 12, what does it say? It says this. Let me read verse 11 for context. And let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. I remind you that the temple is called Har Habayit, the mountain of the house. It's a mountain. Okay, Shiloh was a mountain. Okay, and it says, you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed for yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall be surely put to death. Not a hand shall touch him. He shall surely be stoned and shot with an arrow. That's what the Bible says. So in the temple, then they put a perimeter around the temple buildings inside the 500 cubits by 500 cubits the Bible talks about to enclose the temple, because of from this position where I'm at here, and if I start walking through that threshold there, now I'm in a greater place of holiness. Okay, so therefore, in order to do a Nazarite vow, a Gentile would have to cross that fence right there, and if he's uncircumcised in the flesh, he will be transgressing the holiness of the house. That's why Ezekiel says that no uncircumcised in the flesh and in the heart will enter his temple. Let's read again in verse 8 of chapters 44 of the book of Ezekiel. When you have kept charge, it says, my house, when you offer my food, my fat and the blood, and they broke my covenant because of all your abominations. He's speaking to the house of Israel. And you have not kept the charge of my holy things, but you have set others to keep charge of my sanctuary for you. Thus says God Elohim, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter my sanctuary, including any foreigner who is among the children of Israel. Clearly, Paul knew this. That's why he got arrested in Acts 21 when they had a testimony against him that he was introducing Trophimus to the temple and he was from Asia. The accusation to arrest Paul was that he took an uncircumcised Gentile into this area that you see right there. Okay, this is important to understand. Okay, so when you go to the book of Acts again here, it says, a Gentile cannot go beyond that point, so they cannot do an Nazarite vow, because it includes sacrifices. Verse 26 is important. Then Paul looked along the man on the next day, and after he had purified himself, together with them, he entered into the temple courts, announcing the completion of the days of purification until the time the offering will be presented on behalf of each one of them. Now, watch this. 7 days of purification, right? And you will do that. The vows were done during Pentecost. So therefore, you have 7 days about to be completed. Remember, he went up for Pentecost, okay? But when the 7 days were about to be completed, the Jews from Asia have seen him in the temple courts. The word courts is not there, by the way. You see, here courts is supplied to distinguish the area from the interior of the temple building itself. So therefore, it's talking about here. Okay? That's what it's talking about. Stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, shouting, Israelite men, help. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people, the law, and the temple, this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. Exactly what Ezekiel says. Exactly what Exodus 19 says. For they have previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesians in the city with him, whom they thought that Paul had brought into the temple. Okay? So clearly it was a false accusation. Why do we know this is true? Because, the laws of holiness speaks about different areas of holiness in the temple. Let me go here real quick. So let me take you now. He goes through here. He goes through the south door entrance of the court of the women. Okay? Now you see the steps? The moment you go up the hill here, this is holier than the area that I just left. You're going up in elevation because remember, it's a mountain. You go through the door. Then you go to the Nicanor gate, to that door, the big door to the right of it right here. The northern wicket, Shiar Nicanor. Then you go to the right. And you come into the southeast corner. That right through this door is the chamber of the Nazarite. And in the chamber of the Nazarite is described as in Ezekiel, you have a huge cauldron in front right there with fire. And then you read Numbers chapter 6. In Numbers chapter 6, it tells you the rules of the Nazarite vow. Let's read there. Hopefully you guys will are enjoying this. This is some of the things normally people are not putting into context, and I think it is important to do so. Okay? Now, when you look into number 6, and you start reading in verse 10, verse 9, it says, and if anyone dies very certainly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head. That's what happened if you touch a dead person. You have to start the cleansing again, okay? That's what happened to Paul when he shaved the hair. It says, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the seventh day he shall shave it. Now remember that after 7 days, after the days of purification in Acts 21, Number 6 tells you shave the head, and then you bring the hair there and you put it underneath that fire. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons to the priest, to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So he takes the hair, he places underneath that fire, then he takes the animals. Remember, he needed to pay for himself and 3 other. Then he'll walk this way, up the 15 steps, to that door on the right, the small door. You see, the Nicanor gate right here is the equivalent of the eastern gate in the tabernacle. Then you go all the way to the front of this door right here, just like the Bible says. And it says, on the 8th day you shall bring 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons to the priest at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And the priest shall offer one of the sin offerings and the other as a burnt offering, and make atonement for him because he sinned by reason of the dead. In other words, if you get defiled, then you need to be reconsecrated. Okay, that's the law of the Nazarite. It says, verse 12, he shall consecrate to the Lord in the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb of the first year as a trespass. That's what it's called, asham. But the former shall be lost because of his separation was defiled. Now, this is the law of the Nazarite. Let's talk about the Nazarite. He's taking the Nazarite. These are the rules. Verse 13. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, exactly where I'm standing. He shall present his offering to the Lord, 1 male lamb. Now the question is, why is he north of this big door? Because he presents the animal there, and the priest will have to slaughter it, will be north of the altar. Now I am north of the altar. So that door will be immediately north of the altar. It was still considered as the Nicanor gate. Okay? Everything has an explanation if we study it. Okay? So I'm standing at this door. Now this is the law. Verse 14. And he shall present his offering to the Lord, one male lamb in the first year without blemish as a burnt offering, a ewe lamb in the first year without blemish as a sin offering. Now, what's interesting is the word sin doesn't mean that he did anything wrong in this case. It's that it's a purification offering. He has been purified for the Lord, okay? So it says, as a sin or chata'at, and one ram without blemish as a shelamim, as a peace offering. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? A basket of unleavened bread and cakes, fine flour, mixed with oil, unleavened wafers, anointed with oil, and their grain offerings and their drink offerings. Then the priest shall bring them before the Lord and offer his sin offering and his burnt offering. And he shall offer the ram of peace before the Lord with a basket. In other words, a Nazarite vow has been done by Paul 28 years after Yeshua died and resurrected. Interesting. How come they don't teach us that? If we never consider the temple and putting all that what we read in the Bible with everything we're studying, then we never want to fully understand the narrative in the Bible. Does that make sense? So, watch this. Let's go to John 7. And I'll be done with this. In John 7, if you follow the story of the last great day of the feast, there's a whole ritual that goes with this. Okay, and I don't really have the time. I've already been speaking for an hour, so time flies. But I really want you to consider doing homework on the water ceremony done on the week of Sukkot, 7 days. And here we have in verse 37, 38, and 39, when Yeshua says, on the last day, that great day of the feast, Yeshua stood and cried out and saying, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And he who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart shall flow wells of living waters. Now, what was the ceremony being done in the temple? What were the songs being sang in the temple? And how many people were present? This is very important. So, as we continue to understand the temple and understand the narrative in the Bible in connection with the geography of the temple, we will learn deeper dimensions of prophecy, eschatology, understanding all these principles. If we understand the feast and how they function in the temple. If you go to verse 14 of chapter 7, it says, now about the middle of the feast, Yeshua went up into the temple and taught. Now, did you know what was being read in the temple during the middle of the week? Yom Tov, there's a special Sabbath, the middle of the week. The Torah, the Haftorah portion, the portion of the prophets that was being read in the first century for that was Gog Magog, Ezekiel, I think 28. Gog Magog was being read in the synagogue at that time. So it's quite interesting when you start looking into all the information, how much information you can get to improve the understanding of what we now understand in the Bible. If we disregard the temple, Acts 21 is not going to make sense, because then you have to deal with the fact that we have written in our Bibles that Paul took a Nazarite vow, which according to number 6 includes sacrifices. But I thought Yeshua did away with the law and the sacrifice in the temple. But yet there's evidence throughout that they kept the feast for the 40 years that they were in Jerusalem. As the temple stood, they kept the feast. So why would they keep the feast if in fact Yeshua did away with everything? That makes no sense. So I highly recommend you continue your research, study it out. There's a lot more information we can study today. I'm going to leave it here, and I hope and I pray that maybe you were able to learn something new today. And if not, it's okay to repeat it and to renew it and to review some information. But in the meantime, if you know any Spanish-speaking brother and sister, let them know about our temple courses. Go to treasuresofthetemple.com in English or tesorosdeltemplo.com in Spanish. If you have a Spanish-speaking friend, tell them to go to teshuva.tv. And there we have over 200 or 300 videos of foundational teachings that will help us grow in our faith, as well as wisdomandtorah.com to help you with these stuff. Okay? May the Lord bless you and keep you guys. Thank you so much for your time. And this is a great way to celebrate, where we're at, celebrating that we're following Torah and that we are not taking the bait of the nations by mixing the holy and the profane, mixing those things that do not line up with Scripture. So the world right now is celebrating things that are not lining up with the Bible. Many people in the Hebrew roots are doing it. Sadly, they are. Why? Lack of information. So let's pray and hope that we can continue to grow and move away from the ways of the nations and continue to move closer to the ways of the Lord. Shalom to all of you. Bye-bye.